Hi, this is Patrick O'Reilly from the Vintage Video Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 240, Old School Movie Review. It's Chris McBrien here, along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. We've spent a lot of time recently on movies from the 80s, so Derek decided that I needed to get out of my comfort zone a little bit and watch something that came out after 1989. And, you know, I've said many times here on the show that movie comedies kind of died as an art form after the 80s, so Derek wanted to put that notion to the test. And we're going to do so by reviewing Old School from 2003. But before we get to the movie, any pop culture you can educate me on this week, Derek, before we get started?
Well, sort of yes and no. I don't have the traditional long list of here are the movies and TV shows I've watched because
So no fear of the ticking clock coming in.
I hope not. I hope not. I'll try and be brief with the few things I do have to speak on. So I had the good fortune of taking a little time off before Christmas and going away to Las Vegas for the weekend.
Nice.
And it was a lot of fun, as Vegas always is. Vegas is like my home away from home. And it just so happened that my favorite hockey team, the Boston Bruins, was playing the Vegas Golden Knights. No coincidence that this trip happened to fall during this weekend. It's just the way that it all came together, which was perfectly fine.
Nice.
So my pop culture related comment is, in Las Vegas, there are slot machines everywhere, and they're always changing them up so that they've got new themes, new art, new styles. Like, really, a slot machine is a slot machine. They're really essentially all the same. But you want to try and entice different people. And I noticed over my last few trips that more and more of the slot machines are themed based on pop culture things, whether it's a movie or a TV show or even game shows. So, for example, some of the ones that I had a chance to play on and that I was able to see this time around, one of the big ones that was in every casino was based on the movie The Little Shop of Horrors, which you and I were just talking about before we started recording.
It's an odd thing to come out. Like, it was like from 1986. That's great.
Well, and that's it. Sometimes the older pieces are easier to license. So that's why you get some of these sort of nostalgia ones. Another older one was I saw 3 different Ghostbusters machines, 2 of which were based on the 1984 movie, and one I think was supposed to be based on one of the more recent remakes. Didn't play that one. But it actually paid out pretty well. And then from sort of some newer movies, there was a series of slot machines, different slot machines based on the Game of Thrones properties.
Oh, sure.
I saw one that was based on the recent reboot of the Jumanji franchise with The Rock. And
hold on, was the Game of Thrones one, was it by any chance called a Dinklage?
It's a Dinklage.
No, unfortunately not. But I did win a pretty sizable jackpot, getting all of the Tyrion Lannisters on my screen at one point. So that was fun.
You didn't get shortchanged on it then?
No, I did not. Not this time. One of the ones that's been consistent for me, that's been around a long time, is a Wonder Woman slot machine based on the TV show from the 70s with Linda Carter. Oh, there's 2 different versions of the slot machine because the show.
One of the best theme songs. Did they play the theme song when you're winning it?
Oh, Chris. Okay. So if you get the bonus, the theme song goes off. And with the slot machines, most of them are digital now. It's not like your traditional 3 mechanical reels. It's all like
where the actual the things rolling over. It's just like bing, bing, bing.
Yeah, they don't. Most of them are not like that anymore. Most of them are all digital, like computerized. And so because it's digital, you can
trust them now if they're digital. Like,
well, I know how heavily
at least when it's rolling, it physically stops on a thing. But if it's digital, like, they could just be rigging the dang thing.
It's possible, but the thing is so heavily regulated that I don't think any of the casinos would risk losing their license over, jimmying a few machines. But you never know. Know. You have to take it on good faith. But the Wonder Woman machine, like so many of them, you can adjust the volume. So some people, they want the volume to be down because they don't care for the music or whatever. Me, I'm the opposite. I want it to be as loud as it can go.
Especially when it comes to the Wonder Woman theme. I want that thing blaring.
Jackpot or in the case of the Wonder Woman slot machine, when I hit the bonus, it plays the Wonder Woman theme song and it is so loud. Look at me, I'm winning money. I'm having a good time. I've been on some trips with other people where they're like, oh, I don't want anyone to look at me. I get so embarrassed when it starts dinging and binging and the lights are going off. I'm like, no, that's half the fun of Vegas. But I also, to sort of bring this back, there was a bunch based on game shows. So there have been Price is Right slot machines. I've seen many of them over the years, but the new ones all now have Jim Carrey on them, which, sort of that way, they're a little more recent. They've reissued a new one on the $100,000 pyramid, which I sent you some pictures. I won a big jackpot on that the first night.
Oh man. When you won the jackpot, did it sound like this? That would have been cool to hear.
It sure did. It sure did. They've licensed the whole thing. Yeah. And then, I also had a chance to play based on the original TV show slot machine based on Press Your Luck.
Ooh, nice.
So I checked off something off my bucket list that I didn't really know needed to be on my bucket list until it happened. Not only did I was playing the Press Your Luck slot machine and I lost, I hit a whammy. And then like a half an hour later, I heard Last Christmas by Wham. So I got whammied and whamageddoned on the same day in Vegas.
Wow.
So check that one off the bucket list. Didn't know I needed it, but got it. So yeah, didn't have any new movies or TV, but got to appreciate some of the pop culture as it ties in with my gambling problem.
Nice. For me, I got to watch a couple of movies from 1982 to the surprise of no one. I watched 48 Hours, and my wife actually watched it with me, and she actually enjoyed it. The one with
nice.
Murphy and Nick Nolte. He was really good. And I finished watching On Golden Pond, also from 1982. It's on the Tubi app. I've been watching it in bits and pieces here and there. I don't have a lot of free time on my hands, so I have to watch most things in like smaller increments, And I think my wife was like, I don't know, she was busy doing some online Christmas shopping or something like that. And she's like, okay, you can watch whatever you want. So I finished watching On Golden Pond. And then the next night she's like, oh, you can watch whatever you want again. So I started watching Piranha from 1978. It was on my mind because remember our last show when we had Patrick O'Reilly on to do B movies in the 80s? And I mentioned Piranha would have been my number one on the list, but it came out 2 years too early to qualify.
Right.
So I decided to watch it. And one of the reasons why I like this movie so much, Derek, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you before, but back when I was 9 years old, all the way back in 1979, a long time ago because I'm old, my family moved to Venezuela for a year. My dad went there for work. Now, keep in mind, 1979. There's no Netflix or anything like that back in those days. So we get there and there was like 3 channels on TV and they were all Spanish. So we got a VCR and my parents, or like in 1979, it was probably like a prototype at that point.
Probably cost us $500.
Oh yeah, it was really expensive. It was like one of those top loader ones, and then my parents decided to buy a couple of videotapes and then we would just watch them over and over. And one of the movies was Piranha. Maybe they thought like it was like cool, like since there were actual piranhas in the river there in Venezuela. I don't know. But like there's nudity and stuff and like totally inappropriate for a 9-year-old. But I mean, hell, it was 1979. Like the rules were different back then. But I think we had like 3 movies. If I remember, we had Piranha, Smokey and the Bandit, and Thank God It's Friday. It was like about disco music. And that's pretty much all I watched for a year. But so anyway, so I was really reminiscing this week because I got to watch Piranha. So anyway, I thought it was kind of cool. So, I also have this for you.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, what is the funniest fish in the world?
I don't know.
A piranha. See what I did there?
Yeah, I was really hoping you were going with clownfish, but no, you went the other direction on that one. All I I wanted for Christmas was a new intro.
Get in the studio and record.
All right, okay, the gauntlet has been thrown down.
Just last week, I reamed out Roger Moore. He was totally satisfied.
I have no idea who that is.
Penis reduction surgery.
The absolute best documentary I saw all year was
Carol Baskin. Carol Baskin.
He sounds like a nice guy, right?
I kind of walked into that one, didn't I?
All right, Derek, like I mentioned at the top of the show, we've done a lot of movies from the 80s recently, so it was over you to pick a movie that came out after 1989, and you decided to go with Old School from 2003, so maybe you can just kind of kick things off. Why that movie, of all movies, did you want to watch and review here on the podcast?
Well, it had come up in conversation in one of our previous shows a few months back. I keep a little running list of movies where I'm like, oh, we should watch that down the road. So it had been on my list, and I just personally wanted to rewatch it. It had been a while. Excuse me. I've probably seen it, between 5 and 10 times before. It's got its parts. It's not necessarily something I could watch back to back over and over again, but it's definitely worth the rewatch. And I hadn't watched it in a while, and I was kind of curious as to how it was holding up, because like any movie, there are going to be things that set it in a certain time frame, whether or not that's relevant to the story. With a movie like this, so much of what they're trying to do, the relationship between the characters, is pretty timeless. And I was a little curious as to what sort of things in the movie, other than the fact that the actors are so much younger than they are now, would sort of tie this to that sort of early 2000s time period. And we can talk about that a little bit as we start to go through it. But you have, as you said at the beginning of the show, I know you always talk about how new comedies are terrible. They don't have that rewatchability factor. They comedies, in your opinion, reached their pinnacle in 1989, and they went downhill from there. So this is an example of one that I really liked. I actually didn't really love it the first time through, but as I watched it on the rewatch a couple of times, as the years ticked along, I started to like it more and more. And I think, honestly, for me, I think it's because I'm not a huge fan of Will Ferrell. And so that was, I think, sort of my barrier to entry the first time I saw it. But the more I watch this movie, the more I can enjoy it. And the movie's directed by Todd Phillips, who, again, I know we will definitely talk about some more. And he also did the Hangover movies. And so that's another one that we may have to watch. I can't remember. Have we done the first Hangover movie on this show before?
No. I
couldn't remember if we had or not. So this movie came out in 2003. Hangover comes out in 2009. He does part 2 in 2011. So, I mean, the director has a lot of comedies under his belt. There's a few other ones. Again, we can go through his filmography a little later. But there's not a whole lot of people making great comedies after 2000. You have the sort of the Judd Apatow crew, and then you've got Todd Phillips and the people he works with. And so I thought, well, let's do the Todd Phillips stuff first, and we can always come back and do some of the Apatow stuff, in the new year. So correct me if I'm wrong, you had not seen this, or you had not seen it in its entirety before. Nope. Is that correct?
No, I don't watch anything after 1989.
Okay. And that was my thought as well. So, again, I wanted you to sort of come at it new to you. And we'll dive into it, and you can tell me what you liked and what you didn't like, and we can figure out if you think this is the exception to your rule, or if this just is another example of why you think your rule is true to form.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a good place to start. Like I believe that movie comedies died in the 1980s, and a lot of the sort of quote unquote comedies that have come out since then, like I believe they pretty much all suck. And I think, like, I'm getting the feeling you kind of agree with that, but like, why do you think that is? Do you have any thoughts on that? I have some, but
comedy, part of what makes comedy funny is an understanding of the context of the gag, the joke, the scenario, whatever it is. The idea that you think you know where it's going to go, and then you get an unexpected outcome, whether it be an unexpected punchline, or if it's like a skit or a gag or a visual, something that's just, it's not what you're expecting, but it's funny. It's not shocking. It's not like a jump scare. I didn't expect something to jump in front of me, but that's how it works. And I think that modern comedy, say more recent comedy, rather, is probably a better descriptor, is going to focus on things that are happening in the here and now, and that are appealing to, who are we kidding? The 18 to 35-year-olds that are that age group now, and you and I are not in that demographic anymore. So I think that we may find, or we may not find, what other people think is funny today as funny because we don't have that shared experience. We don't have that context. And so, it's like when you watch a foreign film that's a comedy and things are like the characters are laughing and things are clearly funny on screen, but if all you're doing is reading the subtitles, you're not getting the nuance. You're not getting those little pieces. And I found that often when I'd go to the film festival and watch foreign films that were comedies and the audience would be laughing. And it's like, I don't understand why this is funny because there's this disconnect. And I think that's a lot of what's happening now for you and I is in the last 10 to 15 to 20 years. It's that disconnect of, they're not writing for us. They're writing for that 20-year-old. And that's neither of us anymore, I'm sorry to say.
You think?
But as is the form of our podcast, I like to think that I keep on top of some of that stuff a little better than you do. So I do still find some of the things relatable, or at least I understand why they're funny and can appreciate it and laugh at it. Whereas I think in some cases for you, it goes right over your head because they're referencing things that you don't have that familiarity with. So I think that's why you can constantly go back to your 80s and say, well, this was great. Well, yeah, you lived through it. The writers of those movies at that time were writing for you. You were that demographic they were shooting for. A comedy that comes out today, I'm sorry, is not writing for the 50 to 60-year-old white man. It's, that's not going to give them dollars.
I feel like it's more than that. And I think, in my mind, the decade of the 1990s killed comedies. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. First of all, the 1990s were all about independent movies.
Yes.
After like Sex, Lies, and Videotape and movies like Pulp Fiction, independent films were all the rage. And it's basically how Harvey Weinstein made his fortune. That's how Miramax became this major studio at the time back then. Because all these independent movies were sort of made outside the mainstream of, the Hollywood studio system, right? And that was a big, big deal then. There was that. There was also CGI became all the rage in the 90s. Like Jurassic Park and The Abyss and T2, Judgment Day and all that kind of stuff. And there was other forces at play too, like things like Disney. Disney movies became a thing again in the 90s, if you remember. Aladdin and The Lion King and Little Mermaid and stuff like that was all a big thing. Disaster films were big in the 90s. Remember Twister, Independence Day. Armageddon's a good, Titanic even, really, for that matter. And then there was the whole thing that you mentioned a couple weeks ago that got me thinking, Die Hard on a Blank was a thing in the 90s. All these action movies that followed this sort of premise. And so I think with all those things going on, there just wasn't an appetite from audiences for comedies in the 90s. So as a result, it just died as an art form. And the ones that they did make were pretty shitty, like Coneheads and Problem Child and Encino Man and movies like that. They just weren't very good, So I think it was the decade of the 1990s sort of killed comedies for all those reasons. That was my kind of thought.
I think also you've sort of tap danced around one common theme of almost everything you just talked about was dollars and cents. Part of the reason independent movies became a big thing is technology became available where filmmakers didn't need to have a studio backing them to make what eventually became a full-on Hollywood movie. You had this generation of people who had grown up with a camcorder who now were looking at things differently and working outside of the established machine. They could make a movie for super cheap. And so you had studios like Miramax who were willing to take risks on smaller productions because it was dollars and cents. They pay a small amount of money to secure the rights, and they have the potential to make a ton of money if it becomes a hit. And you can see things like you mentioned Pulp Fiction's a good example. And much later in the 90s, you had like the found footage with Blair Witch Project and things like that, where it's dollars and cents. And then as computer generation and the tools started to change, they could do things more cheaply. So like Jurassic Park's a good example. Yeah, it costs a lot of money to make, but it probably cost them less to ultimately do with computers than it would have if the whole thing had to be stop motion or real actual, I was going to say dolls. That's not the word I'm looking for, but puppets and marionettes and things of that nature. So it's this combination, I think, of the dollars and cents driving it. I think also in the 90s, you started to get more of the political correctness, for better or for worse, where there was increased awareness and increased sensitivity to certain types of disenfranchised groups that didn't want to be a punchline anymore. And we talk about Revenge of the Nerds all the time,
yep.
right? You laughed at the guy because he was gay. You laughed at the guy because he was Asian. You know, you laughed at this kid because he wore glasses. It's like, I think when you started getting into the 90s, there was a lot more sensitivity around that. And I think rightly so. But I think it almost was like the pendulum swung too far too fast. And it was too much of a risk financially, dollars and cents, to put out a comedy that might upset people and get boycotts and have protests, and suddenly this $1 million movie makes no money because people are protesting it. So I think that that's part of the reason we didn't have a lot of great comedies in the 90s. It was safe fare. So you said something like the Coneheads, which again, based on a Saturday Night Live sketch. So it was a property that people were already somewhat familiar with. You had those kinds of comedies that come together. Encino Man is a very tame comedy. It's a PG rated comedy. You're not as likely to offend anybody with those kinds of movies as you would have, a decade earlier, where you're like, well, we don't care. We're just going to put it out there. We're going to make money off it. So I think that was a big part of it as well.
Okay, so for this movie,
but that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, okay, so on to old school here. It was released on February the 21st, 2003. As you mentioned, it was directed by Todd Phillips. It was starring Luke Wilson, Will Ferrell, Vince Vaughn, and had a budget of $24 million. It made $75 million at the domestic U.S. box office. But that year, 2003, any guesses as to the number one movie at the box office?
That would have been before Marvel. Probably a sequel, Lord of the Rings, maybe?
Well, that's a great guess. But Finding Nemo was the number one movie at the box office. Then Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, The Matrix Reloaded, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, Bruce Almighty, and X2, X-Men United. So 4 of the 6 movies at the box office that year were sequels. Ugh. Nice. Okay, so this movie... Overall, I agree with something that you said earlier. I think this movie overall isn't very good, but it does have a few memorable scenes, and they are strong. But it's really inconsistently funny, and it's a bit awkward at times. So it for me, it doesn't stand up to those comedies from the 1980s. Sure. I mean, what does? But I want to talk a little bit about the cast because it's always good to get it. Yeah. Luke Wilson. I think it's pretty fair to say that Luke Wilson is a very odd casting choice, I think, to play the lead role in a comedy. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. He seems like an odd pick. He's just really, really bland.
Yeah, he's an actor who bland is the best way to describe it. Anytime he's in a movie, I sort of go, oh, look who it is. But at the same time, you never think, man, if I heard Luke Wilson was coming into a movie, I'd be the first in line to see it. But at the same time, if they're like, I don't know if you're going to like this movie, it's got Luke Wilson in it, you're not going to be like, well, forget it then. I'm not watching it. He seems very, very neutral in my mind anyway. It's almost like his career was...
He's like the Craig T. Nelson of his generation.
Yeah, it's like his career's not good enough to be a failed actor, or it's too good to be a failed actor, but not good enough to be like an A+ actor. And how Owen Wilson has had a better career than Luke Wilson is sort of beyond me. But I mean, I guess personality goes a long way. Who knows?
So why do they call him the Godfather? I don't think I ever understood that. I don't know. I feel like he was miscast here. I almost feel like Will Ferrell would have been better suited to play the lead role.
I don't know. I think so. To answer your Godfather question, they don't really address it other than when he walks into the house and Vince Vaughn is giving the presentation to the fraternity pledges the very first time. And he just says, ladies and gentlemen, the Godfather. I think he's just looking for some sort of way to raise the status of his friend here, right? Like he's clearly living vicariously through his friend who is single and has all these options in front of him. So he wants to put him up on that pedestal by making him the king. And I think just Godfather is the idea of, okay, well, if this comes out, then he's the top dog here. Right? And I think that's all you really need to read into it. They don't ever actually explain why they chose that name, but...
I'm like you, too, with Will Ferrell. Like, I'm not a huge Will Ferrell fan, but I feel like he might have been better off because, I don't know, like, in some ways, like, you could kind of picture him as being, like, the kind of hard partying guy back in his day. He'd be the Godfather. You know what I mean? Not Luke Wilson. But then you'd be screwed because you need Will Ferrell as Frank the Tank.
Well, that's it. I think you need Luke Wilson to be that straight man to allow Will Ferrell's outrageousness to just play off it that much better.
Even Vince Vaughn might have been better suited as the lead role. Like, the thing is, he's not a very likable guy overall, so I guess he couldn't pull it off. But Will Ferrell, like you, like I said, I'm not a huge fan, but for me, he's always been at his best when he plays a supporting role.
Agreed.
Like,
yes.
I did like him in this movie. And I think we can talk about a few of our favorite scenes from the movie in a bit. I'm sure we're going to get to that. But a couple things that stood out to me just off the top of my head, like the streaking, and again, we'll get to that in a bit. And for some reason, I actually spit out my drink in one scene. They've got the little baby. So Vince Vaughn doesn't want them to use profanity. And he's like, all you have to do is say earmuffs. And then I just cover the kid's ears. So he shows them, right? He covers the kid's ears and he's like, okay, now you can say anything you want, you see? And Will Ferrell just blurts out, yeah. I just spit my drink out. I don't know why. I found that so funny, but I just did. I think with Will Ferrell, like, he's better taken in kind of small doses. I think whenever he's the leading man, he's always kind of fallen flat for me. Like things like Anchorman and Talladega Nights, those movies miss the mark for me. But I think when he does these supporting roles, like, he's better. I think of Austin Powers. Remember when he was Mustafa?
Yeah.
Like that scene when he falls.
Very burned.
oh no, you shot me. You shot me in the arm. Like, that was pretty funny. Yeah, it's funny because I'm not a huge Will Ferrell fan, but I think he was probably the best thing about this movie.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And from what I was reading about some of the trivia and stuff on the movie, they were saying how a lot of the stuff that he did was ad-libbed. That a lot of them did was ad-libbed.
Oh, yeah,
but
for sure.
Like, they were saying that whole earmuffs thing was just something that he and Vince Vaughn had sort of come up with. They credit to Vince Vaughn, and just like when they were improving, he's like, oh, let's just do this. And again, you need a certain level of talent to be able to do that. And the fact that Will Ferrell had come from Saturday Night Live, like, you knew he had those improv chops, which is, I got to think, a big part of why he was in a movie like this. At this point, I don't know if he was still on Saturday Night Live in 2003 when they made this, or if he had just recently left, but he was a bankable name. So the fact that he wasn't the lead, was kind of an interesting choice. That it's like, okay. And from what I was reading, this was sort of Vince Vaughn's first foray into comedy.
Oh, yeah. The studio didn't want to cast him.
Yeah,
he did like
goes
Swingers.
On to make all these great comedies after this.
Yeah, he was in Swingers, which was quite a big hit. Was an underground hit, and then he made that stupid remake Psycho, if you remember. But the studio didn't think he could do comedy. I'll be honest with you, I'm not even sold on the fact that he still can. But I don't think Vince Vaughn is very charismatic. He always kind of comes off as a jerk to me. Yeah,
he always seems a little smarmy. It's like, okay. And there's even the one sort of creepy scene where he's like with the college girl, and then she actually tries to make a move, and he's like tries to be the good guy. Oh no, I'm married. And I'm just like, ugh. It's like, dude, you clearly, this is what you want. Like, what the hell? Like, I'm not saying he should have done anything, but at the same time, it just seemed like an awkward scene, which maybe was the point.
So Ellen Pompeo, she is absolutely adorable in this movie. I had an instant crush on her as soon as she came on the screen. Like, that smile of hers, I don't know, my God. So I can see why she went on to have success in TV, although I've never watched Grey's Anatomy. My wife watches it all the time. But,
yeah, I watch it too.
Oh, I thought she was just adorable in this movie. I really, really liked her a lot. And on the other end of the spectrum, I guess, is Alicia Cuthbert. She's just flat out gorgeous. I don't know how she didn't go on to do more acting roles. She was in 24, wasn't she?
I believe so, yeah.
With Kiefer Sutherland, right? But she hasn't done a whole lot else, has she?
I want to say, I could be totally talking out of my butt on this one, but I want to say that she raised the flag on somebody who was being inappropriate, one of these sort of Weinstein kind of situations, and got blackballed before. Got blackballed and wasn't able to find work. And this was like sort of years before Me Too and right. Everything else. And it's like, well, it's great that she was able to stand up for herself and make these claims. Again, I could be totally wrong. I could be misremembering this, but I'm fairly certain I remember hearing that. And now, didn't she end up marrying a hockey player?
Yeah, I think it was Mike Fisher. She ended up marrying. But she's Canadian too.
Well, yeah, of course. Canadian girl gonna marry a hockey player. Go kid.
Yeah, it's not just her looks. Like, I feel like she's very charismatic. I think when I watch this movie, she steals scenes when she's in them. So I think like she has all this charisma and stuff, but you know, she, like I say, she never really parlayed that in for whatever reasons, you know, like you mentioned. I want to mention Jeremy Piven as well. He plays this bad guy. He seems to do that pretty well. But I think as I'm watching this more and more, I'm thinking, I don't even know if he's the bad guy here. Like, they bullied him when he was younger, right? Wasn't he like the younger brother of somebody? And then at one point
they say when they first meet him,
they mentioned, or I think it's Vince Vaughn is like, didn't we lock you in a dumpster or something? So really, they're the bad guys, you know, not him. I remember the first movie I remember seeing him in was One Crazy Summer. You mentioned that movie on our last.
He was in that?
Yeah. He was. There was like that rich kid, the rich blonde kid. He was one of his guys. I've never watched Entourage that he was in, but I thought he was really good here. But like I say, I just kept coming back to the fact that, you know, I don't know if he's really the bad guy. Like these, and maybe that's why I don't like this movie so much, is these three guys that start up this sort of fraternity when they're older almost reminds me of, remember Revenge of the Nerds, you know, from the 80s. It almost reminds me if the Alpha Betas went back and started up a frat again, it'd be like them. So in some ways, like they're like the three lead guys in the movie, but in some ways they're kind of jerks. I don't know.
Chris, let me ask you this.
Yes.
You're a professional academic. Mm-hmm. Are you maybe perhaps projecting a little onto this film where you just feel a kinship to the dean because that's close to you in real life? And you know that if there were these young upstarts that were having a good time and partying while you're home with your family and your children, you're not going to be looking at them going, wow, I wish I had what they had, and I'm so jealous, and I'm going to just have to do everything in my academic power to give them a hard time. You sure there's none of that creeping into your decision making here?
Possibly. I also, when we were talking about Alicia Cuthbert, I noticed her dad, the guy that played her dad, was John Locke from Lost.
Yeah, Terry O'Quinn.
Terry O'Quinn. I thought that was cool. Patrick Crenshaw was Blue. I remember him from Alice. He was one of the regulars at Mel's that would show up from time to time on that show. And I also remember him from Night Court. But I think most people recognize him, you know, as Blue in this movie, you know.
In Night Court, was he the guy who spoke really slowly?
Oh, I think he was. He was only in like one or two episodes. I looked at him right away. I'm like, that guy was in Night Court. I remember that. So, and I did want to touch base on the director, Todd Phillips. You kind of mentioned him. He also wrote the screenplay of this movie. And then, like you mentioned, he did the Hangover movies. He was nominated for Best Director Oscar for Joker.
For Joker, yeah. He's had a very successful career as a director and a producer. Well, and a writer. Like, why not?
Needless to say, I've never seen the Hangover movies or the Joker. Go figure. But he was also nominated for an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for Borat.
Really?
Yeah, but I think for me, like for a guy that sort of went on to become so critically successful, he's got kind of a disjointed directing style here. Like, I don't know, are his other movies like that? Obviously not, I guess.
Well, I don't know what you mean. I mean,
this movie to me plays out like a bunch of scenes, a bunch of almost comedy sketches, just kind of thrown all together, and it's very disjointed. That's what I thought.
Oh no, I mean, I didn't feel that any more than the story sort of required it to. But again, different people, different opinions.
Yeah. Well, like I said, like overall, it's kind of hit and miss for me. But I think like the scenes, some of the scenes themselves, some of them are actually pretty good. So a couple scenes I want to talk about. The tranquilizer dart. Like I laughed at this. So what's his name? Is it Sean William Scott? Is that the guy's name?
Yeah, it's the guy who was Stifler. Yeah, Sean William Scott.
He's got that mullet, right? And then he's like this sadistic animal handler for the kids' party, and he's got this tranquilizer gun, and then Will Ferrell accidentally shoots himself in the neck. I think that's the best scene in the movie. And then you could totally tell he's got like this prosthetic around his neck, like where the dart is stuck in. You can just see it, right? But
well, I think it's supposed to be like that it's swelling up.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
That's what I was taking for. Okay. Yeah.
And then I like Sean William Scott's reaction. He's like, yes. That's awesome. You took one in the jugular, man. And I just started laughing. I thought that was so funny. And then the drug starts to hit Will Ferrell. And he's like, what? Oh, you're crazy, man. I like you, but you're crazy, man. And the guy's like, you got a dart in your neck. And he stumbles and falls into the pool. And then he starts to hallucinate about his wife. And she's kissing him, and he comes to, and it's Sean William Scott giving him mouth-to-mouth CPR. And he starts trying to tongue the guy, so he just throws him back in the pool. That whole scene I thought was really funny. Like that, I was just laughing thinking about it, as you can tell. So yeah, that scene was good.
Yeah, I think between that and the one you mentioned at the beginning with Will Ferrell streaking, like just that whole sequence where he's like, "Oh, streaking," and he from the moment when he's like, I promised my wife I wouldn't drink, and the guy's like, what? And he's like, yeah, we're gonna go antiquing, and it's like he's basically trying to be a grown-up, and then the frat guys are giving him the weird looks, and he's like, okay, I'll do one.
When it hits your lips,
it's just so good when it hits your lips. Yeah, and then like there's just that immediate downward spiral for the next 5 minutes, and then he's just like, you see him come out, he's naked, and he's grabbed Snoop's mic, and he's like, let's go. And then of course when the wife and her friends are in the car, and then they see him. And they don't know it's him at first. They start making comments. And then when he gets in the car, she's like, get in this car. And he comes in like butt first.
Yep.
I was laughing so much. And of course, I'm reading the trivia on it. And they said, like, in the rehearsals and that, they're like, are you going to do it? Do you want to be fully naked? He's like, I got to be totally naked in this. Just the sneakers and socks. That's it. And there's all these behind the scenes stories about because they did it live on a real street, and like people looking out, and he's like, they did the rehearsal, he was wearing a robe, and people were like, what's going on? And then it's like took it off, and people were like, whoa, that's a lot of Will Ferrell we're seeing there. So it's
probably the most memorable scene of the movie for a lot of people, I think, was the streaking. And like you mentioned, like I think the reason why it works is because just the commitment that he has to that scene, like you said, like you know, just not even just because he's naked, but like there's that whole falling off the wagon thing, you know. So he's like committed to this scene. But I think in some ways, like there's kind of the problem. Like the fact is, like he's an alcoholic, right?
Absolutely,
and he can't drink. And when he does fall off the wagon, he just goes nuts. Now, I mean, I like 80s comedy, so I'm like the least prudish person, you know, in the world when it comes to this stuff. But it seems like a little bit of an odd choice of subject matter, this alcoholism, to try and mine for comedy. I don't know. That was my kind of takeaway from that.
I didn't really read too much into it. It's this sort of the laughable drunk has been a part of movies for so long. It's like it's you know, I don't think it's intended to belittle the seriousness of alcoholism, but I think it's sort of low hanging fruit. We'll just say that when he drinks, he gets crazy, and then Will Ferrell can be Will Ferrell and do whatever he wants. One of the things I want to mention about that streaking is, so I have the actual DVD of Old School, and on the front of the disc, like the actual CD that you take out of the packaging, it's got that picture of him running down the street naked, and the part in the middle where you would normally like put your finger to take the disc out, that's where his butt would be. So his butt is not actually on the sticker. That's where the cutout in the center is. And I just laugh every time you take it out of the thing and you're like, hey, I put my finger in Will Ferrell's butt in order to get this DVD out of the package, which I'm sure was a very deliberate choice by the people marketing this product. So
a couple other scenes I want to mention. So the wedding scene.
At the beginning.
The band.
Oh, yeah, the Dan Band. Yeah.
they're the Dan Band, this actual band, right? And they do all these covers of 80s tunes. But for me, it's the swearing that they put into the songs. Like, he's like, I need you more tonight. I need you more than ever. And it's just, again, it's the commitment that he puts into the singing. They just go all out with the profanity. I find it's funny because he just sings with this passion. But the reactions of the people that are dancing, at first they're like, not sure if they actually heard the lyrics right. Like, was that an F-bomb in the song? And then like the old people are hearing it. And I found that funny. And I think maybe because I used to DJ weddings. So that scene actually had me laughing too. I got nice. That was pretty funny. Andy Dick's BJ scene.
That was pretty good.
The girls hire him to teach them how to give oral sex. And he's like, I don't care if you got a husband of 10 years or just some hot sailor you met at TGA Fridays. And you tell he's speaking from experience, right? Yeah. He's like, that you just met a few months ago, never called you back, left you with a little something called herpes. which I then gave to the dog. He just keeps, you just tell he's improvising this scene over and over. This is pretty good. But and then when he gets down to demonstrate, first of all, they're playing Hungry Like the Wolf, which I thought was pretty funny. And then he starts using his teeth so much. He's basically shredding the carrot. I'm like, what? Like, it just, again, it's just outrageous, but that made me laugh too. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, I'm not usually a fan of Andy Dick, but that was a small part and it was pretty good. Yeah. So again, some of these performers, you give them just a small little part to work with and they can kill it. It's like, I would never watch a movie with it. He's one of those people. Andy Dick's a star.
Yeah, you couldn't imagine him like leading a film.
Yeah, no, it's I'm just sort of trying to think of like what are some of the other like the whole thing at the end where they have to do the academic competition or like they get kicked out and they have to do the school spirit thing, and it's like you got to do academics and athletics, and there's the scene with the debate where they're like they bring in the Raging Cajun. He tries to bring in the ringer, and then Will Ferrell. It
kind of reminded me though a little bit of trying to rip off Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely what they were trying to lean on is that whole idea of, you know, this is the way a lot of these 80s movies work. Like he's trying to use that formula but update it a little bit. And the fact that the main characters are supposed to be like 10 years older, like this is almost like if you're going to put yourself in their shoes and like if you're going to go to see this movie in 2003 and you're in your early 30s, you're going to know those movies from the 80s because you would have grown up with those movies from the 80s. So I think it was definitely a deliberate choice to lean on some of those tropes that you were already familiar with from those 80s comedies.
I'm sure it was. Oh, just something that just came to mind was the scene too with the pledges and the hazing, where they have the cinder block thing. I noticed in that scene the one actor is the guy from The Big Bang Theory. Did you notice that?
Yeah, Simon Helberg. He's plays Wolowitz. Yeah, he's in a couple of scenes. Yeah, he's in a bunch of scenes, but he only has a couple of lines. Mm-hmm.
He's the one that's married to like that really gorgeous blonde girl with a high voice in the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
But I think the part that made me laugh about that scene the most was when Vince Vaughn is talking to them all, like they're all together in a line, and he says something like, he's like, you're going to experience intense mental strain, and then Will Ferrell just lunges at them and he yells. I don't know why. That just struck me as so funny. Like it was just weird. And then he's like, Frank, pace yourself. But yeah. Remember when the scene like Frank like just yells at them for some reason? I don't know why. It just struck me as being really, really funny. But overall, like I said, I think, you know, there's a few scenes that I laughed at quite a bit, and thinking about them now, I do. They are quite funny. You know, but overall, it just, like I say, it just kind of is a little bit disjointed. Like it's like these individual comedy sketches that are going on. I just didn't think it threaded together really all that well. It tries to be Animal House for the millennial generation, I guess, for lack of a better sense. But I don't know. I don't think it really succeeded. Here's my suggestion.
Sure.
If millennials want to see Animal House or an Animal House style comedy, go back and watch Animal House. Like it's way better than this. You know, that's my thought.
So I want to just circle back to something I said right at the beginning before we wrap it up.
Sure.
The movie takes place in 2003. I assume it's supposed to take place when it actually came out. Mm-hmm. The only real things that I found in here that dated the movie, I mean, the absence of mobile devices always dates a movie, but the fact that Vince Vaughn's character, it was the Speaker City was the store, and he talks at the beginning about having discounts on beepers and DVD players, and then there's a couple of critical parts in the movie where they have like the voice recording cassettes, like the very beginning, Luke Wilson, they're at the conference and you see him put the little micro cassette in and he hits record and he hands it to his buddies and he's like, I'm going home early. And then, which of course then sets it up for the end when there's the tape recorder and he pops a little cassette out and he goes, I did good. I got the cassette. So, I mean, that obviously that dates it, the fact that they needed to use an actual cassette recorder. And then just the idea of beepers, like, you know, that people actually carried these things around. It's like, hey, look, somebody's trying to call me. Well, when I get near a phone, I'll call them back, I suppose. But yeah, other than those little details, like for the most part, this movie could easily take place today, or anytime between 2003 and today. Like I think a lot of the themes they talk about, you know, the idea of these old guys trying to relive their youth, the variation on the idea of how much responsibility do you want or need. You've got, Vince Vaughn's character who clearly has some money, has a job, has a family, has a wife, has a kids. You got Luke Wilson, who doesn't have any of that. You got Will Ferrell, who we see him get married at the beginning, and then by the end of the movie, he's divorced. So it's like, these guys, they're old enough that they should be leading grown-up lives, but they're still sort of young enough that they don't really know what they're doing. And I think that's sort of a very relatable theme that definitely gets reused over and over again in pop culture and movie and TV. And I think that, I think a lot of the stuff in this movie does have a certain timeless quality that you could watch it now 20 years later and it's still funny. And I think you could watch it 10 years from now and it'll still be funny. Aside from the fact of the cassettes and the beepers, a lot of this I think will still hold up.
I guess like you're saying, these guys are trying to go back and relive their younger years and when they were like, in a frat house and frat boys and all this stuff. But the only one of them that strikes me as being like a partying frat boy was Will Ferrell. The other guys, I don't think they were. They didn't feel like it anyway. So again, maybe that's just why I thought it was disjointed and stuff. You want to give it a rating out of 10? What would you give it?
Probably like a 7.
Wow, that's pretty high. I would think I would give it a 5. I'll give it 5 out of 10. It just doesn't hold up with the comedies of the 80s for me. I mean, that's just not just me. But anyway, on that note, what do you say we have some
fun with Caveman?
We like to play a game around here that we play, from time to time. And I think we're going to play it again. So here it is. Pick the flick. Yeah, pick the flick. You get the synopsis, then pick the flick. You get the year, pick the flick. We love our movies. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you the year and the synopsis, and you have to guess the film. And the common thread here is these are all movies about college. Super easy. All right? Super easy. Should be. We're going to start with some real easy ones. 1978. At a 1962 college, Dean Wormer is determined to expel the entire Delta Tau Chi fraternity, but those troublemakers have other plans for him.
Is that not the aforementioned Animal House?
National Lampoon's Animal House, of course. Okay, 1984 at Adams College, a group of bullied outcasts and misfits resolve to fight back for their peace and self-respect.
Yeah, again, the aforementioned Revenge of the Nerds.
Here's an easy one for you. 1985. An uptight teenage prodigy enters a top engineering college but feels awkward among the freewheeling students when a professor aims to turn their laser project into a military weapon. He and his offbeat roommate plot to ruin the plan.
Right. We did that one on this show. That was real genius.
1986. I'm sticking with a lot of 80s comedy.
I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but the three movies that we just talked about, we've done all of those on this podcast, right? You and Yancey did Animal House and Revenge of the Nerds before I joined the show.
Here's one we haven't done, but it's still an 80s comedy. 1986. To help his discouraged son get through college, a fun-loving and obnoxious rich businessman decides to enter the school as a student himself.
Oh, I love this movie. That's Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield.
All right, breaking out of the 1980s for a moment. 1993. A young man has always been told that he was too small to play college football, but he's determined to overcome the odds and fulfill his dream of playing for Notre Dame.
Oh, it's got to be Rudy.
1985. Back into my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. A group of friends just out of college struggle with adulthood.
I don't know. That could be anything. I have no idea.
St. Elmo's Fire. St. Elmo's Fire, 1985.
Nothing was even on fire. That movie sucked.
1997, a janitor at MIT has a gift for mathematics, but needs help from a psychologist to find direction in his life.
Yeah, Good Will Hunting.
2001. Elle Woods, a fashionable sorority queen, is dumped by her boyfriend. She decides to follow him to law school. While she's there, she figures out that there is much more to her than just looks.
Yeah, it's a great movie. This is Legally Blonde.
2000, 4 college buddies embark on a trip to retrieve an illicit tape mistakenly mailed to a female friend.
Oh, that was by the same director as this one, right? It was, wasn't it just called Road Trip?
Yes, and it was directed by Todd Phillips. It's really, if you think about it, it's just based on the scene from Animal House when they go on the road trip, right? That's where they got the idea for it. Okay, and the last one, 2000, an English professor. Oh, sorry, I got 2 more. My mistake. Okay. 2000, an English professor tries to deal with his wife leaving him. The arrival of his editor, who has been waiting for his book for 7 years, and the various problems that his friends and associates involve him in.
Jeez, I have no idea.
The Wonder Boys.
Michael Douglas.
Michael Douglas,
right? Tobey Maguire? Right? Yes. I haven't seen that since it came out.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last one, 1998. An odd assistant for a college football team discovers he has a unique tackling ability and becomes a member of the team.
That's The Waterboy, Adam Sandler.
Very good. All right. You did really well. You know, all those movies on college.
So college movies are sort of in my wheelhouse. They're there's certain kinds of movies. If it's time travel, con artists, bank robberies, I'm in. College movies are like just creeping into that list. I've seen a lot of them.
Nice. Okay, so our next show is going to be our last one for 2022, Derek. We're going to
that time of year again. Yep.
Yeah, we'll come back. We'll have some fun next week, and then after that, then we're going to have a best of episode, and then we're back in January with season 8.
And I guess, Chris, in January we'll start with like a sort of a year in review, right? That's usually what we do.
Yeah, we usually kind of take a look back at 2022.
Look back on 2022. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And you know what? One of the other things we never even talked about today was they just released the nominations for the Golden Globe. So maybe that's something we can talk about a little bit at the start of the next episode, and go from there, because we're getting into award season, and you know how much we love award shows. So
we certainly do, and you know how up I am on all new things in pop culture.
Yes.
So I have lots to contribute to that one. But yeah, we usually do take a look back at the year, that's for sure. And because I'm not really up on a lot of the new stuff, maybe I'll just write a new song.
Hey, maybe.
Kick off the new season with a bang. So, all right. So next time we come back, we're going to have a great show for you. One of our last ones of the year, that's for sure. But until then, this is Chris McBrien on behalf of myself and Derek Meyer saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.